So in this video, we're going to be looking at cell structure. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, we learned about this when we were in year 7, so why are we then doing that in GCSE level? Well, the reason being is in year 7, you just focus mainly on names of those organelles, so the parts of the cell, and the basic functions, whereas moving forward, it's really important that we have a solid understanding of these structures to be able to then access the more difficult GCSE questions, but also to understand how a whole system works together. So first of all, cells are the fundamental building blocks of all living organisms. We know that, we talk about that all the time, but building upon that is to understand how those cells will all work together to then form tissues. Those tissues work together to form organs. Those organs work together to form an organ system. And understanding that right down to the cellular level allows us to then understand certain processes, such as, for example, respiration, photosynthesis. Okay, and finally, understanding how cells are structured and the functions of them help us to then understand disease and how disease is transmitted from person to person, but also from cell to cell. Okay, and it helps when you're, for example, working in drug discovery, if we know where those interactions take place between the disease, for example, the virus or the bacteria and the cell, so that then we can create drugs that intercept it, okay, or work in a way that we can then develop vaccinations. So if we're thinking about COVID-19, it's been found that interacts with a protein that's located in the cell membrane. Now, scientists will be able to start to think about, well, what drugs could we use to make sure that interaction doesn't happen and to prevent it? And then that's when we get to a point where we've got the vaccination that we're all looking forward to hopefully getting. Okay, so now learning outcomes. So to be able to identify the structures within plant and animal cells, to be able to explain the functions of these structures, and then to compare and contrast plant and animal cells. Okay, so they're the 3 things that we're going to be looking at. Okay, so I've got a diagram here which you've probably seen quite a few times before. So we've got our plant cell this side, we've got our animal cell this side. You'll notice that there's only 3 boxes for the 3 organelles that only appear in a plant cell. Okay, and then we've got these boxes in the middle, these 5, which are for an animal cell and a plant cell. Now the key words I've listed at the bottom. So pause the video now, take 4 or 5 minutes just to see if how many of these that you can remember, okay, from Key Stage 3. Okay, so we'll start with the plant cell. So we've got our chloroplast, we've got our vacuole. Now, when you do some extra research or some extra reading on Bite Size or other websites, you might see that there's a vacuole in an animal cell, which is true, but it's not a permanent vacuole. It's not always there. Okay, and it's not in all types of animal cells. So what we like to think of is that a plant cell has a permanent vacuole. It's always there. Okay, and then we've got the cell wall. Now, the cell wall is not to be mistaken with the cell membrane. Okay, so we can see that both an animal and plant cell have a cell membrane, but only the plant cell has a cell wall. Okay, we've got our nucleus. We've got the cytoplasm, which appears in both, mitochondria in both, and then we've got the ribosome, which is in both. The ribosome is often quite a forgotten one by students, so make sure that you spend a bit of time trying to remember the structure that's the ribosome. Okay, if you didn't quite get all those right, it might be worth just spending a bit of time now, pause the video again, go back through and see if you can do those labels. Okay, get somebody to test you on them. Because it is important that you can label those plant and animal cells because they're easy marks to then pick up in the exam. Okay. What I've done here then is I've listed the structures down one side and we've got the roles of those structures down the other. Now, some of them you'll be able to remember really, really easily. There's others that you might be a bit more cautious of. So if we think about the nucleus, straight away we think about controls the activity of the cell. Now, the nucleus is not the brain of the cell. Okay, I've seen so many different students over the years writing down that nucleus is the brain of the cell. No, it is not. It controls the activity and it stores the genetic material for the cell. Okay, mitochondria, aerobic respiration happens here, releasing energy. Now, Mr. Bassford's made loads of videos about energy. Okay, and at no point would he ever say that energy is created. Therefore, we need to have that physics mindset on in biology too. So aerobic respiration allows the release of energy. It does not create energy. Okay, and you'll also notice that I've mentioned aerobic specifically. Now, you wouldn't be discredited for just saying respiration in your exam. That'd be totally fine, but anaerobic respiration occurs in the cytoplasm. So that might be something, if you're thinking of doing biology later, which I hope you all are, what that will mean is that you've got that bit of extra knowledge. Okay, so chloroplast. So it contains chlorophyll, so that's the pigment which allows light, absorbs light, and it's the site of photosynthesis. We've then got the ribosome, and proteins are made, or a better word than made is synthesized. So they're synthesized there. We've got the cell wall, which is made of cellulose. The reason why that's important, the reason why I've put that in there, is because the next video is going to look at bacteria, okay, in eukaryotic, prokaryotic cells. And we need to understand there's a difference between the cell wall of a plant cell and a cell wall of a bacteria. So just be mindful of that. Okay, we've got the vacuole, which we've just talked about, which is full of cell sap, maintains the structure. Cell membrane controls that movement. So that's really important when you're thinking about diffusion and active transport and thinking about those proteins that are in the cell membrane to allow that transport to happen. Okay, and then we've got the cytoplasm, and that's where those reactions take place. Okay, so it might be worth now, if there was a couple of those that you weren't quite sure of, again, go back, revisit. Okay, take the time to go through and learn them. Make sure you address those misconceptions that you might have, especially the ones around like energy being created, or the idea that it's the brain of the cell. Okay, so we've got some questions now. So there's 3 questions here. So 2 of them relate to AO1 skills. So that's basic recall. So we're thinking about the recall of information there. Third one's a little bit more tricky, so I'm just going to give you a second to read through them. Okay, I'm going to pause, well, you're going to pause the video, I should say, for 5 minutes now and have a go at those questions. Okay, so let's look at them then. So we've got list the structures found in a human cell. You'll notice that I've written in a full sentence. Okay, so it's really important that even though you're doing revision work, you're writing in full sentences. Okay, so in a human cell, there are the following structures: nucleus, mitochondria, ribosome, cell membrane, and cytoplasm. Okay, simple recall. Okay, so once you've learned those structures, you'll be able to answer those questions super easily. Okay, so what's the function of the nucleus and mitochondria? The function of the nucleus is to control the activity of the cell and store genetic material, whereas the mitochondria is the site of aerobic respiration and releases energy. Again, I've mentioned releasing energy, not creating. Okay, the third question is the one that I think you'll find a bit more tricky, because you will have seen Krebs Cycle and probably had a bit of a freak out that you've not learned about it, you've not been taught it. Now, that doesn't matter. The Krebs Cycle in this question is totally irrelevant. So when you do A-level biology, which I hope lots of you do, you'll learn more about the Krebs Cycle. But if we read further on, it's an important part of aerobic respiration. Where does the Krebs cycle take place? So what this question's actually asking us is, where does aerobic respiration take place? Now, that takes place in the mitochondria, because the Krebs cycle is part of aerobic respiration. So what you can start to do is discount some parts of the question, okay, moving forward. Don't panic if there's something in the question that you've never heard of. The examiners aren't examining you on knowledge that you shouldn't have had from the specification. Okay, the reason why they put these things in is because they're more application based, more making you think about the knowledge you have, new situation. Okay, so there's 4 more questions here. So the first 2 again are those recall questions. The second 2 are a bit more tricky. Okay, so looking at doing a bit more application. So again, I'll give you 5 minutes for those questions. Okay, so let's look at the answers. So what 3 structures are only found in plant cells? So we've got the 3, the cell wall, the vacuole, the chloroplast. Okay, like you can see, it's just recall. Cell structure is responsible for making proteins. That's going to be the ribosome. So again, I've written in full sentences, even though it's a 1-word answer, made sure that I've written in a full sentence. Okay, so library cells produce amylase, which is a type of protein. What type of cell structure will have a lot will they have a lot of? That's really similar to, if I flick back, this question, okay, this part of that, okay, and if you can remember about enzymes, you might recall that amylase is an enzyme, okay. However, if you don't know that, or you've forgotten that information, if we take out that part, which is a type of, so if I physically take it out so we can see, okay, so I've took that out, type of protein, what type of cell structure will they have a lot of? We can pretty much deduce from there then that if it's got a lot of protein, it needs a lot of protein, sorry, they're going to have a lot of ribosomes to produce that protein, okay, to synthesize it. Okay, you might also think, well, there must be a lot of mitochondria because that's quite an energy heavy process. The last one then is the hardest of them all, okay, in my opinion, because it's not giving us that bit of extra information, it's requiring you to think. So muscle cells are likely to have a large amount of what cell structure and why. So we think about muscles, okay, we know that they require a lot of energy for the actions that they're doing. Okay, so we're not just thinking about exercise, we're thinking about, you know, your cardiac muscles and your heart and so on and so forth. So because we know that muscles require a lot of energy, therefore, what process is energy released from? Okay, it's released from aerobic respiration or respiration. So therefore, there must be a large amount of mitochondria to allow that to happen. Okay, so we've got 3 learning outcomes, which I hope you feel like you've achieved. If there's one that you're thinking, I don't think I could do that on my own, then go back through, have another go at those activities, and just spend a bit of time revisiting it, testing yourself. Okay, you've also got the mastery documents, which have got the little questions and the answers that you can do the look, cover, write, check activities on. And they're really, really useful for you to just cement this knowledge into your head. Now, like I said, these question styles here, like question 7, is a lot more tricky. And if you'd like some more of those style of questions, just email me and I can send them over to you. Or if you need some more support with any of that we've just covered, then please do let me know and I'll be able to spend a bit of time going through it with you. But first and foremost, make sure, so aside from these learning outcomes, you're really, really confident with the cell structures and whether they belong in an animal or plant cell. And you're really, really confident with the functions of those, okay, because that will then stand you in really good stead for the rest of your studies.